Hello, this is John Spink, Director of the Food Fraud Initiative at Michigan State University and an Assistant Professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine. And this is a preliminary review of my presentation, Food Fraud Detection, Prevention, and Management, presented at the Food Fraud Conference 2018, here on Wednesday, July 4th, Port of Spain, Trinidad. First off, this is one of my favorite slides. Warning, counterfeiters attend anti-counterfeit conferences. In reality, when we're dealing with criminals, a human adversary, we really need to be realistic that if they're making millions on us, cheating us, we might not know it, but they do. And they are going to do everything they can in their power to continue making $1 million on us. So we need to be aware that they're going to do things like review these videos. They're going to review our content, our documents. So instead of fighting that and complaining about it, we might as well be realistic and use it. So if we know that the criminals are looking at our information, well, let's figure that into our communication. Let's figure that into our work processes. And that then leads to this realistic, practical review of food fraud prevention. And just communicating with the bad guys is a key piece of it. We have to be aware of it and expect it. When we start to look at incidents, any incidents, you don't prevent everything in the world. You prevent things that have been a problem. So there's a hierarchy here. And the cycle of prevention, intervention, response, this is from the U.S. Food Protection Plan 2007. It doesn't start at prevention. That's the goal eventually, to have a prevention program, but it starts at intervention. And once we have a problem, we address that, then we consider how to look at other similar problems. And at that point, we need to really shift back. And it's really fundamentally different, the way to think about it, prevention, than it is these quick interventions. So to do that, to reduce the number of future incidents, we do need to shift. And that's why there really needs to be a fundamentally different approach when you're thinking about prevention. So to give you a little straight kind of analogy here, an incident is like a broken leg. So if you have a bone sticking out of your leg, you don't just set an appointment next week to go to your regular doctor. You go to the emergency room. So that is your immediate action. And the first step is that intervention and to fix it, to get you so your bone isn't sticking out of your leg. Now that's not prevention, and that's not more of a specific review of why your bones are brittle. But another one is then suspicious activity. You don't feel good, so there's a trigger. There's something there that's leading you to say, boy, my leg kind of hurts. I should go check it out. So in that sense, you go to the doctor for your 30-minute physical. Now they may say, yeah, you've got some weakness. I think you've got some weakness in your bones. Let's do some more tests. And they'll then would add more tests along the way. You don't immediately go to the emergency room if you have a sore leg. More tests are needed, and that's the response. So we've got intervention and response. A little more proactive, but still from we'd say a trigger event. Finally, aging, I'll just say life. I'm experiencing like everybody else is. We know that it's going to come along. So we need to think about that. And if we'd like to make the rest of our life with fewer interventions and responses, then we really should take a prevention approach. This is going to the doctor and looking at a long-term plan, exercise, diet, vitamins, other things like that. And that's what we're looking at food fraud. It starts with these interventions, things that have been, say, in the report, the parliamentary report on food fraud from Trinidad identifies those interventions. It also identifies some of that suspicious activity or things that really could use a response, some things that just don't feel good. But now the key step, and if you miss it now, it may never come back. The opportunity now is to cycle back to prevention and look at it. Now that there's some momentum and some real insight, to step back. Now when you're looking at the prevention plan for your life, that is really a lot less and a lot lighter than if you're looking at how to fix a broken leg. It's less urgent. There's less immediate resources needed. You can really take this more, again, methodical, slower approach. And that's a real key to cycle back to prevention. That's why a lot of times prevention hasn't been implemented, because it's not urgent, it's not critical. And even you think about fixing a broken leg in an emergency room, there's a whole different set of resources needed, human resources, physical resources, timeliness, than it is for prevention. And it's important to step back and look at this and then really shift the focus. Reduce risks equals prevention. So how to act? Well, this is a big issue, and we deal with a lot of people around the world. Some just brilliant thinkers in different areas. What we see a lot of times is this focus on the intervention, the melamine in infant formula and milk, horse meat and beef, and we see treatments. That's the emergency room. And then we see these other activities. But really, to look at prevention, we need to step back. And there's a whole series of events that occurs, not just the intervention, not just that treatment. The fixing a broken leg would be a treatment. Authenticity test would be a treatment, really critical, and you've got to have them. But the decisions on those, you see on the far right, the decisions are really based on more of a methodical approach. We really need to do the diagnosis. If you think about suspicious activity or you just don't feel good, you go to the doctor. Your doctor would do a detailed diagnosis. After that diagnosis, you would consider the prognosis. So if you don't do anything, do you just not feel good? Is that okay? Well, would you have open heart surgery if you just don't feel good? Now, if there's a chance you have a heart attack, then that would be the prognosis, and that would help inform your decision. But we really need to figure and look at that end of it, of the root cause and these outcomes. And then you consider risk treatments. And this is really kind of a maturing of the science and of the thinking here. The medical example again is you go for that checkup. And I think that's a real key point for where Trinidad is right now. You're aware that you don't feel good. There's some suspicious activity. There have been some incidents. And you really are saying, let's look at prevention. We'd rather get ahead of this. And so the point now is really looking at this diagnosis. So for food fraud vulnerability assessment in all activities, how much is enough? We call it a corkscrew approach. Go around once real light and see how it looks. That could be few resources. It could be two of us sitting in a room looking at this. That could be very light. But we need to look at the whole system, the whole process, the entire vulnerability assessment. And that's something we'll do tomorrow, is to go into more details of that vulnerability assessment, a real high level, pre-filter or initial screen. And then you go deeper as you define it needs to go. So that could be review. It goes back into, if there's a ministry that oversees this, then they'll assess of whether you need to go deeper or not. We as the researchers, you as the researchers, don't set that limit. The decision makers do, in this case, the parliament. So there's limited direction on how much is enough. Globally, there's limited direction. It's new. And so that's a real key. We're trying to understand this. Start simple, but do a complete, full assessment. What we mean by that is cover all types of fraud on all products and just get one full assessment done, then you're fine. So if just two of us sat in a room and did it, now that wouldn't be very certain, it wouldn't be very robust, it wouldn't be very inclusive of the other people, but at least you'd have one done. Now we have a complete document, we have a complete diagnosis, head to toe of that patient. We've got their blood work, we've listened to their heart, we've checked their blood pressure. And at that point, then we can start to look at how much more we would need to do. And think about the medical example. That's a real key and easy place to think about it. Go as deep as you need to go, but determined by your resource allocation decision makers and auditors or investigators. So again, what we mean by that is do that initial assessment and then go back to the decision makers. And if they're concerned, very concerned, then you might go to the emergency room next after leaving your doctor's office. Otherwise, you might just try some rest and relaxation. Also, we say auditors and investigators. So in some cases, like for a business, there may be a food safety management system that they're certified to. That auditor or that audit would start to define that. And from investigators, that could be a government agency that's defining really these needs of how much is enough. You only go as deep as you need to go. This takes into account your specific situation and your specific resources. That key is calibrate your fraud opportunity with your risk tolerance. We don't prosecute every crime, so we need to kind of figure out where this whole threshold is. Also, I think before getting into the prevention steps, it's important to step back. It's something that's resonated this week with a lot of people we've discussed. The medical example is a good one, but also learning a new language, not creating a new language. So think about that. So, if somebody from another country that speaks another language came to visit you, and a 3-year-old of them there started to talk to you in their language, it would be, you would not understand a thing, even though they're a 3-year-old speaking baby language. You wouldn't understand it at all. So what we've got is this whole idea of creating a new language is complex, and that's if you're trying to create a new language. But food fraud is like another language. You could learn Russian or Spanish or Portuguese or whatever, but you're not creating a new language. That we've got this already started on a more global scale. trying to figure out another language is complex. So if you just plop down in the middle of Germany and tried to start to figure out the language, now you may be able to figure that out, but you're doing a whole lot of investigation, a lot of trial and error, and that's a major undertaking to try to figure out the other language. That's complex. But using a teaching system to learn a language or having a tutor, it's not easy, but there's a process and there's education. So again, if you got a tutor, German that spoke your language, then they could start to teach you very quickly. That's very simple. You have complete confidence that with some time and a bit of effort, you could learn any human language, right? And that's a key. Food fraud, I think, is really important just to think about as a new language. So that's something we'll get through here the rest of the day, tomorrow, and the rest of this presentation. It's just a language to learn. So food fraud prevention. We talked about the science and sciences of food fraud prevention. Again, remember, there's so many different aspects to this. There's a lot. It's very interdisciplinary, and we want to take the best of other disciplines and combine them in seamlessly to what we do. We want to leverage the best practices. We don't want to have to learn public policy from the ground up again. We can use things there to understand these things. Same with intelligence analysis, supply chain management, and all these other aspects. And it does combine business, social science, and food. And those are very different concepts, and we do have them, as you see, kind of integrated here together for the science and sciences. A real foundation is situational crime prevention, crime theory. And this has been a major breakthrough for us to see this. It's the space of crime. It's looking at your house as a target and trying to make it less of a target. So what situational crime does is it focuses on the motivation. Why someone perceives you, either your company, your retailer, your country, your products, as a great opportunity. Criminals don't commit acts thinking that they're going to get caught. They commit acts because they think they can get away with it, then they can make money on it. We look at factors that lead to a system weakness, and that's the key with vulnerabilities, is looking at weaknesses in a system. Whether you've ever been robbed or not, walking down that street, if you walk down that street in the middle of the night when it's dark and carry a bag of money out in front of you, you are more vulnerable than if you don't go down that street at all. And so in the case of vulnerabilities, sometimes they can be vastly reduced, such as if you drove down that street instead of walk down it, or they can be eliminated. Don't walk down that street. So we look at the weaknesses. Risks are a higher concept with more likelihood, consequence, considerations of the probability that you could get robbed if you walk down that street, and the consequence of how much you would lose in time, money, health, things like that. The focus is detect, deter, and prevent. And so in those incidents, we first detect, and then we try to reduce the incident from occurring, and we try to prevent. The ultimate goal is to prevent. The goal is we're not trying to catch food fraud, we're trying to prevent it. And really the key starting point that was really excellent is situational crime prevention, and it's called the crime triangle. So these are the three aspects that help us understand what needs to be in place for the potential of vulnerability for a crime to occur. And one is the victim. That could be a government not getting taxes. It could be a retailer. It could be a consumer getting cheated. It could be a manufacturer trying to buy raw ingredients that is a victim. So we can focus on that and how we operate as a victim. If we walk down that street holding our bag of money, then we are a victim. We can change the way we think about that. Then there's the fraudster or the criminal. So that's the person that might be on that street. Who is on that street? What do we know about them or the situation? What types of crimes occur? If everything on that street is only carjacking and you walk down the street with a bag of money, then you are not in that hot product of what would be the type of crime on that street. And finally, the area that we can work on the most is guardian and hurdle gaps. So guardians are people that are watching, so a video camera, a guard in the corner, or hurdle gaps. So hurdles are like hurdle technology in food science to try to reduce that potential for the pathogen to grow. There's things we can put in place, such as put that money in your pocket or drive down the street instead of walking down the street. This is a real key, and this is the center of everything. It's all about the fraud opportunity. It's all about the fraud opportunity. The next step is to look at this risk and decision sciences. So is it a problem? Well, you've identified that it's a suspicious activity, there's concern, and your parliamentary report in Trinidad has really identified this as something that needs a little bit more information. And we're getting to the point here where we look at how much of a problem. So we have the set of incidents, we understand why it occurs, but we're getting into more details to see what we think about the security of that street. So first we need to do a quick review and then do a detailed review later. So we're kind of putting all of our concepts together here. So we've got what we call an initial screen or pre-filter, and there's also a detailed vulnerability assessment. One thing that's fortunate, there's a lot of resources and training and insight and education on both of these. So again, first is that real quick first pass pre-filter, and then a more detailed assessment if you need to go deeper. Another key aspect of food fraud prevention is then having a rank at the end. Now, to figure out how to get to this actual rank, you really have to have a different set of assessments. So you think about even different cities in this country or this compared to other countries around the world, everybody has a different set of risk tolerances and understandings of that situation. So a basic risk assessment ranking for a generic system, it does not apply directly to you until you look at the details. The way you look at those details is to first gather information. Intelligence analysis. So systematic gathering of raw data. You need to process it, and then you really want to monitor changes. If we're going to be prevention, we want to look at the changes in the marketplace. And you filter and process into actionable intelligence. So right now what I see is in the Trinidadian parliamentary report is raw data. A review, a survey, insight, but that really needs to be processed. And partially that process is looking at this vulnerability assessments to understand more details of exactly what occurred in those incidents. How often did they occur? What's the type of fraud? Where did the fraud occur? What's the impact on consumers? And that's that step of looking at actionable intelligence. You really are going to define the problem. This is step one in crime science. It really is. It's just really basic. The way that we go about this is we review incidents. So known incidents. So there you had 5 that were specifically listed. Say the one was honey. You'd look details of that to get reports, to investigate exactly what occurred. How did it get in the system? That's looking at known events. Horizon scanning. This is looking at things across the world or the region that are similar. So maybe there's a type of fraud that occurs in a similar type island or a similar product, and you can learn from that. Also changing things like the prices of commodities. So there could be more pressure or more fraud opportunity as commodity prices change. And the other bit of insight is public policy. So if Trinidad starts to do horse DNA species tests on every shipment of ground beef that comes into the country, then anybody that's importing product, whether they know there's fraud occurring or not, this is an influence on the problem because we would get naturally more information, more intelligence if there's more of a focus of public policy on there. Now, one thing you're looking at, is to implement a food fraud prevention strategy. Right there is something that the criminals would understand, is that you're starting to look at it. So the goal is to reduce the fraud opportunity, and that's a big key is the public policy aspect on the problem. Next is countermeasures and control system. So you're trying to detect, deter, and prevent. And so there are a lot of there's current and new technology. So someone will say, hey, we've got this new test. You think you should buy it? That's a real question. Say, well, okay, well, what does that mean? So you've got to have a way to really assess it. And one of those is interoperable enhanced traceability. There's a lot of talk about traceability, enforcement, and prosecution. This is looking at the countermeasures themselves. Then how much is enough? Now, we're not really looking at a true return on investment because we're looking at a project decision. We're looking at what we need to do to get this specific problem, say if it's honey fraud, within a range that people are more comfortable. We have to assess is the current situation unacceptable. And the key is compared to all other risks. It's not, is it good or bad? Is it acceptable that there's one type? Is it acceptable that people jaywalk and don't cross the street at a marked crosswalk? But how does jaywalking compare with honey fraud compared with murder? So we need to compare this risk with all other risks. And a real key with industry, and it does apply to business, is enterprise risk management. So with these COSO managerial accounting practices, there's a lot of things we can definitely leverage that are very familiar to the accountants and the finance people within companies. We can use that to understand how much is enough. And that's called enterprise-wide risk assessment. And an enterprise could be a company or a country. What we want to do is once we assess the entire marketplace, we want to plot it on a map, on a risk map. And so if you look here, it's very clear which ones should be the focus. It's also clear that there's 4 of them that are up in the unacceptable range. The red and orange are unacceptable. So those are ones that we're going to have a lot of discussion about. Now, sometimes we do an assessment and everybody's in the green and the blue. So the key is that you have done an assessment. You've got a methodical approach to explain where you should focus and how much you should focus. If all of a sudden we came with 6 things up in the red zone, then that might be a crisis. That might be lead to the resource allocation decision makers to give an awful lot more money awful lot quicker. And this was an actual assessment for with public information for an entire company. Now, what we do is those numbers, the numbers coming in are here are incoming goods, and the letters are outgoing goods. So here, like say this was a country, you'd see that your risks are that 2 of the big risks in that orange zone were from incoming goods, and 2 would be outgoing goods, product out in the marketplace. Finally, putting it all together. So I talked about all those components. They actually are presented in a specific way because they fit together. And this is what we see as an optimal way to combine everything with everything. We want to connect everything together. So all the information comes in, it can be processed. And we've started to work on a lot of best practices looking at organizational behavior, structure, design, decision making. So we've got it. Remember here, the fraud opportunities is, of course, all about the fraud opportunity. That's a specific function, thinking about that and understanding that. And we've got information coming in. That's a separate function, separate activity. And even 3 of those are very, very different, but it could be one group or type of people looking at that process of what's coming in. And then you first conduct this initial screen, a pre-filter. You think about it for all types of fraud. You might as well, because the bad guys are thinking about all types of fraud. And then you've got this enterprise-wide assessment. You must take this step to understand the actual rank. So yes, a food fraud incident is bad, but how bad? Is it a national crisis? Should you recall all product? Should you wait till next week? Is it okay to do a little more testing or monitor it? We don't know yet how bad is bad after we have suspicious activity. Then you consider countermeasures right away. So there might be some things of, again, do DNA tests of product coming in the country or whatever it is. Stop buying from a single supplier. And then when you look at that, you then would cycle back through the fraud opportunity, consider that as risk treatment, and then you have a vulnerability assessment more detailed. Of course, every time you must go back and look at the enterprise-wide risk to see how this has changed, and you've got that new rank at the end. So the key here is there's already best practices and processes based on ISO 31000 risk management, total quality management, and others. We've got a system in place. So if you do implement something, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to create a new language. Part of the language is already there for you to learn. Then the steps for government industry. Earlier today, I talked about 2 concepts. One is formally and specifically mention food fraud as a food issue. The second, create an enterprise food-wide food fraud prevention plan. And that's what we've got, with these cycles of things. But a key for you is the actual steps. So these are broad concepts. You basically covered this in Trinidad in the parliamentary inquiry. So the next step is looking at the actual steps. And so what we see is companies, and I think that Trinidad is poised for the next step, which would be looking at this whole implementation. This is another academic article published, so you've got a lot of resources if you want to read in more detail. First is to convene a food fraud task force. This would be for the Parliament to officially state that they want to have they want to receive a formal food fraud prevention strategy. This happens inside companies frequently, where an executive sponsor tasks the team or a team, an interdisciplinary team, create a food fraud proposal for what the fully functioning prevention strategy would look like. Now, it may start low and light and then get deeper as you have more experience and successes or understand the problem, but start with convening a food fraud task force. Create an enterprise-wide food fraud policy or mission statement. So this would be looking at what's illegal and what are you trying to do? What would be the statement of food fraud? And a lot of that statement is already in that parliamentary inquiry. Conduct a food fraud initial screening, and that's something we'll do tomorrow to start looking at what is that process. And we'll go through to try to do a quick one just to give an example of what one might look like. And even it could be 2 of us sitting in a room. That could be the first initial screen. And at that point, we now have something that people can, what we say, manage by exception. They can debate which categories we chose and how we selected ranks. Now, when they do give us feedback from that, we then go down and do a detailed vulnerability assessment. So all of a sudden, someone might say, you need to go a lot deeper in cocoa and peppers. Well, okay, we didn't say we were done. We said we just were doing a pre-filter, a start. So maybe it's cocoa and peppers that we go into great detail. Then we plot those on the enterprise risk map to start to understand which ones are the worst. And at this point, it's still really important, even if we're not implementing countermeasures or control systems yet, for that team to consider vulnerabilities, especially for the countermeasures, especially for vulnerabilities that are high or very high. So if we do find that it's diluted honey coming into the country that's got a pathogen in it causing problems, then we can start to consider what might be some real specific countermeasures. That's key because in the proposal, it starts to give you an idea of the type of activities that would go on. That would lead to how you explain the type of people that you need, how many people you need, what type of resources, testing, support that they would need. And that's when you finalize this with an actual proposal. And this should be a real, human resources, resource proposal, budget, business plan for what this new type of activity would be. Now, sometimes it's very light. Sometimes it's the people, like in a company, they just expand their current jobs, have this as one part of their job, in their key job responsibilities now. Sometimes it's an entirely new group that gets set up. Maybe it's one manager managing it. Maybe it's an entire group. We have no idea what that is yet. We have to go through and calibrate it. But the key is at this point, there's an actual proposal, and the resource allocation decision makers, whether that's a minister, whether that's member of parliament, they make a decision, or CEOs or business managers, they make a decision of what they want to do or not. And continuing the current process is just fine. That's just a decision. That's right for the business. That's right for the business. So with that, as I said before, too, a lot of ways to engage with us. We are after service. Just really glad to be a part of this, understanding the system, and being of any support that we can. And with that, I will take